Well, happy Earth Day, everybody, and welcome to the KGS virtual seminar / Geography Department Speaker Series talk today with Dr. Stephanie Potochnick. Dr. Potochnick is an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology here at UNC Charlotte. For her brief bio, she got her PhD at UNC Chapel Hill and her master's here at Charlotte back in 2007. Her research examines the social demography of immigration and how programs and policies can promote the education and health of immigrant youth. She uses an interdisciplinary perspective to identify the health and educational needs and resources of immigrant children and families, and to examine the impact national, state, and local level policies have on their well-being. Her talk today, which is entitled Advancing Young Latino Children's Early Care Education Access and Overall Well-Being in Charlotte and Beyond, presents highlights from two different projects, both of which focus on advancing young from newborn to 5-year-old Latino children's overall well-being. Stephanie, thank you so much for presenting to us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'll share my screen and make this informal. So questions and you're seeing the right screen, correct?
Yes, that looks great.
Because also with students too, this is where, so I say it's kind of a new research agenda and a little bit of a mix of academic soul searching. Because as I was mentioning, I made a slightly career transition. I had recently moved here, coming back, and I was at the University of Missouri for years, a professor there, and had come here with this great initiative. And in doing that, it's trying to leverage what are the strengths of being in Charlotte versus where I was in Missouri. So it's a little bit of a mix of both where I've been and where I'm envisioning I'm heading. All right, so to just give you context, the consistent part of me has always been that I focus on young children and immigrant families in particular. And I'm going to try to convince you, no matter what your research area is, if you're studying populations, you have to care about children of immigrants, and in particular, Latino children of immigrants. That they are making up a huge share of the US population, that immigrants themselves, 1 in 20 by 2050, children will be a child of an immigrant, will be an immigrant child themselves. They are foreign born, but 1 out of every 3 will be the child of an immigrant, where their parents are foreign born and they're US born. And more than half of those are Latino youth. And this is just kind of give you that changing the demographics of the US. People have probably heard that by 2050 will be majority minority in the US. A huge reason of that is this growth in the Latino population. The blue line shows the percent white in the US, non-Hispanic white, declining, and the line that's meeting it is the percent Latino. So this is a demographic shift we have to be paying attention to. And in my research in particular, I look at Latino Hispanic families. And just to give you broad context for those who have never really researched or studied this area, there's huge strengths of Hispanic and Latino families. And these are just a few to try to show some visuals of some of these strengths. But here I'm mapping just different characteristics of Hispanic, non-Hispanic white, and non-Hispanic Black families. One of the big strengths that we always see with Hispanic families is these strong families, that they are much more likely to stay 2-parent families. This is Hispanic families overall. If I broke this up amongst immigrant families, you would actually see that Hispanic families have a higher share of 2-parent households than single-parent households. And eating meals with family, I put that in the sense of, this is trying to always get, survey data to match these harder concepts. But in qualitative research and others that we get, we know that there's a strong familialism, that families are really supporting each other. They're coming to the US, those that are immigrants, really to invest in their children. So building on these strengths, we also know that there's lots of challenges. And these are just a few of the challenges to talk about and what we want to alleviate and address. High poverty rates. You know, Hispanics and non-Hispanic Blacks have the highest poverty rates in the US. Hispanics are much less likely to have health insurance. And a huge part of this, one of the big parts for Hispanic families, is one in four Hispanic children have an unauthorized immigrant parent. And that has real implications for access to resources. And even though those children themselves are citizens, the vast majority, their parents lack citizenship status and legal status, which creates challenges. So this is what I consistently and always have studied. The part that's coming new, or as I'm evolving, is the old me. Actually, I always studied youth, much more so. And so now I'm studying age 0 to 5. I mean, a pitch for immigration is the awesome thing is you get to study new topics all the time. So it's like, well, now I could understand that through the immigrant lens. So I'm collaborating with people on early childhood, the experts. The other big part is I largely sit at my computer and run analysis and never interact with anyone. I study people and never talk to them. And so that's kind of what my new research agenda is not only now doing some qualitative work, but really collaborating with community partners to define our research agenda. And I'll say, so this is more because there's several students here. This isn't necessarily completely new to me. Like this has been my evolution over time of how I became into academics. I did do community engaged work in the Peace Corps. I lived in Ecuador and worked with the community to develop and run programs. I was always interested if they worked. So I went to grad school. I went to UNC Charlotte. I got my master's and then I went to Chapel Hill. My PhD is in public policy and demography, which is all large scale data. I did a little bit of qualitative work, but not a lot. I had to get tenure in my department. And so I really focused on doing large scale data analysis because that was what was awarded in particularly a policy school. So now I'm just kind of wondering, like, now I have more flexibility and I'm wondering, can I go back to that community engaged research? So today I just want to show you the oldish part. You know, what do I historically do? Because this will give you a context of things I can bring to the table. So when you're doing interdisciplinary work, it's trying to say like, what's your leverage? And then where do you have overlap? And then I'll talk about the new part. So the oldish is this immigration raids and looking at the impact on Head Start enrollment. Large scale data analysis, again, not talking to anyone, but actually analyzing. And the new part is working with researchers here at UNC Charlotte to actually work with community on actually now looking at Black and Latino youth and their children and their well-being. So I'll talk about both of those. So immigration rates, this is a paper that I have with a colleague, Robert Santillano, who was at Mathematica and now is at UC Lab. So in policy world, we often work with not just academics, but there's also research centers and institutes. So that's another avenue again, because there's students, there's lots of pathways in terms of where you go with your PhD. And Jade Jenkins at UC Irvine. She's the one who does early childhood education. I do immigration, and Rob is an economist. And so he's the one that really helps out with the methodology of this paper. So our motivation is that immigration rates are on the rise. That anti-immigrant sentiment is increasing. That we have a very restrictive, harsh president on immigration. I say that jokingly because now we have Biden. So I just want to give you this, like part of doing policy work is the timeliness of it. And we started this project, and so we have a paper out, but we wanted to extend bigger. We started pre-COVID and also during the Trump era. So the pitch of immigration, it switches policy-wise. What I want to convince you, and what we will as we expand this paper and continue to publish, even though we don't have that front pitch, the immigration raids are on the rise, is that this anti-immigrant sentiment and immigration enforcement is a pendulum swing. Some of the harshest, these are levels of deportation in the US due to two main programs at the time that I won't get into because the complexities. But if you noticed, it's actually during the Obama years when you had peak rise of deportations, where you were taking people who are unauthorized in the US and forcing them to leave. And it really decreased during the Obama years and then started to pick up in the Trump years, but it's always this pendulum swing. The US is constantly going back and forth between being more welcoming and much more restrictive. And so what we're looking at here in this paper in particular are raids, where at work sites, you may have heard of these in the newspapers, where certain factories may be hiring lots of unauthorized immigrants, and the federal government will come in and do a raid where they go and check everyone's legal status and deport parents. Usually it's the fathers, and they deport them before they get to go home, right? Or they do these in the communities where they may target different apartment buildings or complexes, or even just known areas where day laborers work. So these are the types of raids that we're capturing. And so the contribution of this paper, just big, so what we did with our first paper, and now we're wanting to expand, is this actually was the first paper to look at large scale evidence on federal immigration raids. There's lots of other anti-immigrant policies, 287G, the secure communities, which I talked about. I won't get into nuances, but that's the majority of what immigration enforcement is focused on, because they're easy to track. Raids are much harder to track. So we were able to get from different watch agencies and FOIAs from the federal government requiring that they provide these dates and locations of raids. We were able to gather that. So this is really in the immigration literature, the first on actually raids, not just these other policies. We see ours is, we're also the first to look at young children. Most have actually looked at college investments, older age children and their impact. We're looking at early childhood, which is really key for later life development. And we see Head Start enrollment, a very important public pre-K program. After a raid, enrollment decreases by over 10%. The other contribution of this paper, and this is the debate in the literature, is this effect due because people are not enrolling, though they still live there, right? So it's usually the father that gets deported, but the mother and child stay, and also it has a broader chilling effect on the Hispanic community. So one debate is it that the people are staying there and they're not enrolling, or are they out migrating? So in this paper, that's what we call the mobility. Are we really just capturing people leaving the area? Or are we capturing what we're hoping, what we're envisioning, a lot of the qualitative research suggests is deterrence. People still live there, they're just not accessing resources. And I'll just say that a large part rate of the show goes by deterrence. Okay. So that's the big contribution. Let me just kind of convince you now why this paper is important and why it matters that we care about early childhood education. You can see in this graph, Hispanic immigrants in particular are the children who are least likely to enroll in early childhood education programs. And preschool enrollment has strong effects in later life. In academic engagement later on in life, it can be really beneficial in terms of even into adulthood. A lot of research suggests the huge benefits of pre-K enrollment. And remember those risk factors we talked about, high poverty, lack of insurance. Those are things where those children in particular are able to really benefit from pre-K. And they are least likely to enroll already before raids. And so we're interested in trying to understand, so this is where I get my motivation for large scale data, is often qualitative research. And I try to, so for policymakers, they want both the story, they want to hear what's happening, but they want numbers. And so I really do read a lot of qualitative research to get motivation and see, can we see it on a larger scale? And so in a lot of this research, there is this concern that raids are really deterring families from enrolling in vital programs like Head Start, pre-K, Medicaid. And so what we're focusing on, this is my colleague who does early childhood, has Head Start data. And she's the Head Start expert. If you're not familiar with it, it's the largest federally funded program, early childhood education program, serves over 1 million children a year, and a large share are Hispanic. And they itself, the Head Start program is trying to increase Hispanic enrollment. It's also a very holistic program where it's not only just providing early childhood education, but it's wraparound services. It connects families to safety net supports if they need it. And so it's a much more holistic system to benefit families. And a key part of Head Start is it doesn't require documentation status or citizenship status, which some federal programs do require. So that's the background. So looking at Head Start, so just brief background on the immigration rates. So what we're looking at is the time period between 2006 and up to 2008. If you remember, I showed you there's a pendulum swing in immigration enforcement. It increases, then it decreases. And this is the time we're looking at is raids really became a policy leverage in about 2006, when during this was the late Bush years and recession, when enforcement really hit peak. And this was the first time they had issued the ICE, the Immigration Customs Enforcement, allowing large scale raids to go out as a means to do interior enforcement. There's enforcement at the border, but this was really interior. And so there was lots of increase, 740% increase in raids during this time period. Then in 2009, because of backlash against raids and also other immigration enforcement, the Obama administration changed the tactics and focused more on these paper audits. So that's the time period that we're focused on, is 2006 to 2008, when these raids really were occurring. And this, so just to kind of show you for GIS, and this is again where interdisciplinary work would be really complementary, right? None of us on the team are GIS experts, but we're always trying to show maps. So for policy, the big push for us is making sure it's causal. Like, so economists really drive a lot of policy, and so the design really matters. And we know that places that have a certain policy sometimes are also different than those that don't. So this is our attempt to try to argue that we can treat this as like a natural experiment in ways. And so what this map is showing is just where Head Start programs are, because there's not Head Start programs all across the country. They're only located in certain areas. And then it's also showing where the asterisks are where the raids have occurred. And we're seeing that raids are occurring, at least where Head Start centers are, so that we have enough variation to actually examine the impact of these policies. And just to show that it's all across the US. And it's not just clustered, you know, if it was only happening in California or New York or the South, there's concerns that those regions are inherently different. So that's really what we use maps for in policy, is really to show where it's at and just the dispersion of these policies. So in terms of impact, so this is our kind of hypothesis of how and why would raids impact Hispanic children enrollment in Head Start. So with this data that we have, we only know if they're Hispanic children. We're not able to get at citizenship status or and documentation status, which is rarely available. But we suspect 3 different potential hypotheses. The first, and this is a lot based on the Urban Institute in DC, had a lot of post-raid qualitative follow-up with families. And we saw that some families did move in response to these big raids. So part of what ours could be is deportation and fear, that people are actually just out migrating. So we'll see a decrease in enrollment because there's just fewer Hispanic children in the community, right? And that's not just those who are being impacted by raids, but a chilling effect beyond. Then what a lot of the research suggests too is some families are staying, but there's this, what we call deterrence effect or chilling effect, where Hispanics in general, whether they have documentation status or not, even citizen Hispanics, are fearful. They're being targeted by police, makes them feel less welcoming. They have family who may be unauthorized. So they're less trusting of government, and Head Start's a government program. They may not be likely to enroll. They also face transportation challenges. Head Start, you have to be able to drive your child to Head Start. And that makes a huge vulnerability if you were to get pulled over. There's actually qualitative evidence to suggest that ICE was following people from different schools and Head Start centers to do pickups. And so that created real fear. And then also just weakened social networks. A lot of ways that people find out about different resources is through peers and social networks. But due to immigration raids, there's much more fear and less sharing amongst groups. So we actually think that there could be there's a deterrence effect, a mobility effect. The third hypothesis, though, is it actually could increase Head Start enrollment. So we think the first two were actually driving it and it's likely to decrease. But also it could increase because we know from these immigration raids and deportation in general that it was usually the father who was deported. And now it was a single mother left behind. And so there may be a new need for childcare when there wasn't before, where the mother was able to stay at home with the children. All right. So just kind of big backdrop. I mentioned this before, where we are looking at raids by county, and we were able to get these raids, locations and dates of raids from these 3 different watch networks and FOIAs that they had sent to the federal government. We're looking at Hispanic enrollment in Head Start. Head Start has every year, they're required these program information reports to put out enrollment rates by race. So that's what we're looking at. And what we're doing, this is getting, well, I'll talk about our strategy to net out the mobility versus deterrence effect, is we're using Common Core data, which is on all public school enrollees, to net out migration. I'll talk about that. And then we use just general ACS census data for basic controls across counties. So here, the methodology, difference in difference, I think is a common method that people may know of. You could think of it as like an experiment, but these are called quasi-experiments. What we like to do in policy is we'd love to have an experiment, but you can't do that. I mean, you can't, ethically, you can't just go and raid one place and not raid another, right? It doesn't work that way. So policy is always using these different quasi-experimental designs. And one that was in vogue at the time, and now things go in vogue and then they go out of vogue, but is this difference in difference, which really is trying to be exactly like an experiment. Think about the idea as the raids is a shock. It just occurs, right? Like the idea is that it's random. And there's some suggestion to suggest that was the case. But we're also concerned that places that are being raided may be different than places that are not. So we can't really treat it as an experiment. But the triple difference, so what we're doing is trying to do pre-post raid, and then we are comparing them to communities that are not. So think about your treatment and control group. Right? So what our unique thing is that remember Head Start is voluntary. So it's not that you're required in the US to go to pre-K, that you go on voluntary. So we feel like what's gonna happen is you're gonna also get the out migration. You're gonna get deterrence and then out migration because you don't have to actually enroll. We wanna net that out. So who we're using as a comparison group is first grade, because that's compulsory. So from Common Core data, we can get in the communities, what are the percent Hispanic, number of Hispanic children in first grade. And using that as a way to net out this out migration. Because they should also, if they're impacted, they would out migrate. So if we net them out, we can get the deterrence effect. Right? So that's kind of the idea of the strategy. And we're doing pre-post raid and comparing them to counties that were not impacted by the raid. And so here, I'm just going to give you a big picture, what we found, because I want to make sure I'm able to share where I'm headed, because this is what I've traditionally done. But here, so this is just the outcomes. We did different matching of different counties. You know, we ran it with all counties, and then we did a matching to try to find counties that are more similar to each other. Because you can imagine some counties have no Hispanics or very few Hispanics, some are very large. And the growth rate in Hispanic populations differ, and the politics that go behind there differ as well, and the support systems. And we want to be able to net all of that out because we want the impact of the raid. So we do a different matching strategies, which I won't get into for here, but that's what you're seeing in this. When you're seeing all Head Start counties excluding, they're different matches of counties. So here is just our simple difference in difference, where we're just doing pre-post raid Hispanic child enrollment and comparing that to Hispanic child enrollment in counties that did not have the raid, right? So think about your treatment, your control group, and then it's the interaction. So I'm just gonna focus on all Head Start counties. I'll just focus here, and these are just sensitivity to show our results changing the county match. But we see overall, there's an 11 percentage point decline, 11% decline in Head Start enrollment when these raids occur. But as we noted, we think part of that is mobility. People are leaving. And the other part are people are staying and they're not enrolling. And so using the Common Core, right, the first graders, we're netting that out. We think they should be a good proxy of this out migration. If people are leaving, first grade's really close to, those should be families capturing that out migration. So using that triple difference, we see that 3.3% is due to out migration, but 7.8% is due to this deterrence effect. People are staying in the community, but they're not enrolling, right? And so, and then these are just strengthening it when we get a better match of counties. And I'll say just in the end, that's our overall estimate is about 9.4% is due to deterrence. And that fits with a lot of the qualitative research. It's suggesting that people aren't necessarily moving in large scale, but they're just not enrolling in services out of fear. So that's really the contribution of this paper, is showing that there's strong evidence raids reduce Head Start enrollment, that by over 10%, that we are seeing evidence that it's due to a chilling effect. It's not just out migration, but we are seeing this not enrolling when you're eligible. And just in the end, this really contributes to this burdening literature. We see a lot of literature on not enrolling in health insurance, not enrolling in higher education programs. We're adding to that, showing that it's also in fact impacting young children. And that, I will say, policy-wise matter, because policymakers tend to be a little bit more sympathetic, right? It's trying to convince people on both sides of the issue that this is harmful overall. And focusing on young children sometimes, for different reasons, will get a response versus others. And that's kind of, again, this policy pitch. So to say that was our initial, it was a 5-page paper we had done in this in Economics Journal, and we wanted to expand it. COVID hit. And we have not sat, we've sat on it for years. And I won't go in here, but we're looking to expand. The challenge is sample sizes. So that's our main thing, is we're trying to figure out, there's not that many Head Start enrollment programs, but I want to get to what I'm doing actually today in Charlotte. But just know that this is, particularly for students, publications can take a long time, particularly if they're collaborative, because then COVID, but you know, partner, collaborator had a child, I moved, so life happens. So you just want to have multiple projects at once, all right? So now this is what my life is happening, is actually during this whole process of doing that paper, we now live in Charlotte. I was at the University of Missouri prior. And this has been an exciting and new initiative. And I saw Heather Smith is on here. And this is her world. Like, she does community-based engaged research and did a lot, and has in the past, but on Latino communities in Charlotte. And we're wanting to kind of continue doing that because I do immigration. So I'm really reading a ton of what she has done prior. And so this is working with a whole list of folks, many from geography, so psychology, and then policy and sociology. And then we're working with community stakeholders to do much more community engaged work. So just, and again, I think this might be helpful in terms of students as well, because it's always trying to figure out what do you want to do career-wise. There is no one path, right? So I just want to say that. And this was me, like I was at University of Missouri about to get tenure, and then this opportunity to come back to Charlotte came up, and it was exciting. And then I had to go through tenure again, right? So this is where just know, I guess I'm just saying there's trade-offs in life and you have to make, like family and others. And the exciting thing for this coming to Charlotte was why my hire was created. People have probably heard this, you're from Charlotte, the Charlotte wake-up call, where Charlotte is seen as the least economically mobile city, right? So that became the motivation for this social aspects of health initiative, which is what I was hired under. I'm in a sociology department now. My degree though is in public policy, which is interdisciplinary, but it's not a typical sociology degree. But this initiative was wanting to get applied, interdisciplinary applied research to really help and build mobility and economic opportunities in Charlotte. And so this was a great opportunity to get to do research that I couldn't do in Missouri. Missouri was awesome, but there just wasn't a large Latino population. Getting to go out and collect data just was much more limited. And this actual opportunity to engage and make a difference, I mean, publications matter and they do, but it feels distant. So that was real attractive about this position. And so I'll say what I bring to the table, and I think a good contribution is this focus on Latinos. And particularly in our collaborative group, they have expertise in other areas, but many have never really studied immigration or Latino populations in general. I just want to convince you, in Charlotte, if you're ever studying something in Charlotte, you have to care about Latino population. Same within the US, but particularly in Charlotte. Historically, Latinos and immigrants, in particular Latino immigrants, have settled in Texas, California, New York. But in the 90s, and a lot of what Heather's work really kind of talks about, huge migration to these new destinations. Charlotte was #1 between the 90s, right? Rapid growth. Today, 21% of children under age 5 are Latino, was less than 2% in 1990, right? And I have a great quote, I think it was in the Charlotte Observer: if you haven't met a Latino child, you haven't met the future of Charlotte. Right? So that's exciting, where to come and see, and this is kind of what our work and where we're evolving is, Charlotte is trying to address its economic mobility challenges, its racial segregation challenges, and really create equal opportunity for all. And the South often is thought of as this black-white paradigm, but Latinos are changing that. And by no means did I create these maps. These were probably created by someone here on this team, because it's from the Urban Institute. So this is giving that context for people who are not in Charlotte when you present. But it's just talk, right? And I'm learning crescent versus wedge. You know, in Charlotte is the area that this is the predominant area where largely the non-Hispanic white population is concentrated and a higher class population, right? And then we're seeing segregations amongst, here, and then segregation amongst Black neighborhoods. And now where do Latinos fit in, right? Where do they fit into that story? And so our current project, I had come here 2019, been here 6 months, and COVID hit. But amazingly, I will be honest, like, this has been great being at this university. I was at Missouri for 7 years. I had great colleagues and love, but it took time to make connections. But because of this social aspects of health initiative, we've really already been able to make connections I couldn't have done. And in the COVID context, this interdisciplinary project. And it's been led by Ryan Kilmer, who has been working in the community for a long time. So that actually gave us an in-way, thinking about gateways, right? I mean, who's going to want to work with me when I'm a new person? So it's been really nice to have him and connecting us to different resources. And during the pandemic, right then, there came out a call from Latino organizations wanting to understand access for Latino children in particular to early childhood education, right? That was this initiative from the community. We jumped on that really, even though I'll be honest, I was homeschooling kids, it was exhausting, but we wanted to make a difference. So we created a team around that. And then another call came from Smart Start. They coordinate all prenatal to age 5 systems in the county. And so it's been this cluster of these 2 different kind of projects. We are coming together to develop a new initiative. And the big overarching theme is there's an interest in really wanting to improve early childhood access to all resources, and I'll talk about those, for Black and Latino children in particular, and in low-income children, right? So we've had these small community-based kind of contracts, grants, and we're working towards doing a much larger collaborative grant. And so this is, we've done a report out to the community, but we're still working on. So this is more of just to kind of reflect on, this is different work than I've ever done. So this was really driven by the community and their calls for action. And so it was 3 different broad aims, and this overlaps from the different grants. And so this is a mix of the small projects we've done and the grants that we're applying to. But the overarching is we've been really working with early childhood education, prenatal to age 5 systems, Black and Latino community organizations to really come up with these. And the one thing that we're aiming to do is to, and we've made progress on, is create prenatal to age 5 service inventory. just understand where services are, right? Not only just childcare services, but prenatal services, literacy programs, home visiting programs. They're wanting to understand, this was the Smart Start call, just what, to get an inventory and to map those services. And so that's the first kind of objective of the project. The second is then to map it. Are these services accessible in some areas over others? When we saw the segregation maps of Charlotte, is that what's happening with services? Are there higher quality, more services in predominantly white neighborhoods versus Black and Latino neighborhoods? And that's where Eric and Joseph have really come in, the GIS experts. And then we're engaging and we've done some focus groups and are continuing doing focus groups with low-income Black and Latino parents to get their voices and to understand what perspectives of resources do they want. And I'm gonna whiz through these, but I'll just say this is my freak out moments. Like, I mean, that was awesome, but I'm not a consultant. Like, I need to publish, and that's my interest. So it was a different way to go about it. It's getting the objectives from them and then going back and trying to connect it to our literatures. So here we're just building on social determinants of health and showing that I think you really can use Charlotte as a great way to advance in the broader literature this interest in wanting to create more equitable prenatal to age 5 systems. And this recognition that you can't treat the system separately. Like, educational resources impact health resources, impact food, income supports. All of those systems are interconnected. And that within those systems, we have families, we have neighborhoods, we have the prenatal to 5 system that's trying to connect those, but then the bigger socio-political context. Think about the immigration rates. Those are impacting every one of those levels, right? So we're trying to understand this broader system within a rapidly changing community, like Charlotte, which many communities in the South are changing similarly to Charlotte. And in particular, arguing we need to understand Black and Latino experiences, their commonalities and similarities, because they're the ones that are largely being left out of the system. Right? So this was where, just going back, we could come up with, okay, we can make a theoretical contribution, and it fits with all of our disciplines, because we all need to also publish. That's what academics do. We want to make a difference, but we want to publish. So I will just, in 5 minutes, show you where we are. So it's not the results, but more of the process, right? So this, and Heather could definitely talk more to this. First time I've ever really done a report. We did a report out to the county. During this process, they reconvened this early childhood education executive committee, who have the heads of Atrium Health, Novant Health, of all the early childhood service providers. It's exciting, they have power, right? Like, they can actually make a difference. So we presented our research to them, and it was just different. We finished the focus, we still haven't even finished the focus groups, and they wanted a report out a month later. So it's just doing research differently, right? So we had done focus groups, we didn't transcribe them. The thing you would do is you transcribe and code them. We're doing that now. So it was learning to do a report for a community, which are skills we're trying to develop, and then now turn it into academic. I'll just say overall, meeting our aims, we provided a broad overview of Black and age 0 to 5 population in Charlotte to them, really to highlight the diversity of the Black and Latino population, particularly the Latino population in Charlotte is highly diverse, of different countries of origin, different foreign-born and US-born. We created our database, and amazing, we've been able to use students, undergraduate students here, many from Charlotte, are an amazing resource to include, because they have that context. Many of us are transplants, right? So they grew up in Charlotte and have great context. And we've, a database of 1,200 services, health services, early care education, food and tangible for both parents and children. But now what? I'll just say this is my well, what do I do with that? I can't publish that. This is, again, that what do we do? And so it's us thinking through next steps and also trying to create a one-stop shop. That's the idea that our agency had, is they'd like a resource for parents to come, and the focus group suggests they just don't know what's out there, and trying to give them that information. But we don't have the skills to run a one-stop shop or capacity. So again, this is where we're looking for grants and thinking about ways to expand. So it's useful for both the community and broader. And these are some of the great maps that Eric had created in showing we had tons of services. So the point's not really each map, but just trying to show, we've showed them where these different types of services are. And we broke it down between high and low poverty neighborhoods. And just trying to, again, this was just really to show them the capacity of this database we created of what they could do to community. Well, our next steps is to try to get more data. One of the challenges is we don't know who's enrolled, how much enrollment there is, right? So we have childcare services in their location, but some enroll hundreds of kids, others only enroll like 8. We don't have that data. So this is really just baseline. And it's trying to get our community partners to share the data. That's, and understandably so, but there's a hesitancy. And so that's what is the next step. And would be ideal is to break it down by race and ethnicity to see where people are enrolling so that we could really look at some of these broader systemic factors that are hindering economic mobility in Charlotte. Okay. And then the other is our aims. We've done some focus groups, and if it wasn't for our community partners, there's no way. I mean, it was during COVID. We've done focus groups so far, 3 with Black parents and 3 with Latino parents. And I'll just say, I've done focus groups before, and this was just, we've learned a ton, very different, because these are parents aged with young children. Their time's really limited. So the focus groups I did is we all sat around a table, had a nice recorder, and you could hear everyone. These were where it was a picnic that parents were coming to, and we were able to do a focus group. And that's, so it doesn't fit the traditional, when you think of qualitative research in academics, we're able to transcribe, and because you wouldn't get those parents otherwise though, right? So it's just trying to learn how to do that. And it was just all of a sudden our community partners like, come, you can do a focus group. So it's learning to adapt and do research with the community partner. It's different than what I've done in traditional. But amazing, because you would not have gotten those parents otherwise. I think those voices don't get represented. And I won't have time to go over it. We just have so many results. And this is what we had to present, but we're transcribing now, right? Like, to do good qualitative work, when we think in academics, you transcribe it, you code it. And so it's learning again, they need results fast. They can't wait 5 years. You know, I'm still working on that paper. I think we started it 4 years ago. And then this other is, along the way, we've created fact sheets, and I'm only showing this because it took me a ton of time. Like, I don't have those skills. Like, it's learning those skills, and I had students, but this is what's helpful for, you know, this is what's helpful for your community agents. It's something quick and easy, 2-pager. They're not going to read a journal article. So, and so mapping, so there was one more map just to kind of show. So that's, I mean, I want to open it up to questions because we're at time. And I've talked about my freak out moments. Like, so this is exciting, getting to do community engaged work, but also all of a sudden, at times I'm like, what am I doing? I'll just be honest, the places where I generally publish and my conferences don't do this type of work. If it's not large scale, they just don't care, right? Look at those raids, we're national. Like, that's a lot of what my research does. So it's just every now and then trying to think about and going to new conferences, you know, going to community engagement conferences and learning their literature, learning to talk to people, particularly in a professional. You could see I'm very informal, right? So when we were presenting to the policymakers, just learning to talk and interact with people in different ways. Long-term hope is that we just want to be able to make a difference, learn from each other, and figure out how to do community engaged work that really improves the lives of Black and Latino children. So I'll say that. I mean, there's nothing else. We're still pursuing grant options and working and collaborating together.
Oh, that was good. I learned a lot with that. Hey, let's take a moment and open it up for questions. Are there any questions out there? Because I know I have a few.
Mine is not a question. It's more like, is Our Bridge Kids one of your partners? They are located in Charlotte. They help with immigrants and refugee children. I volunteered there. My fiance worked there. So they have to really keep an eye on the ice when they come in. They need to hide the children. So I mean, not like the children are not in danger. It's the parents. They cannot let them find the parents where they are sending the children home. So that's what they were doing. I would say if you want their contact information, I can send you through email, or if they already your partner, they have a lot of Latino children. And I think from pre-K to even to high school. So yeah.
No, that's great. We've recently connected with them. But no, that's really, so this is where it's helpful. There's so many agencies in Charlotte that are working with, and so it's connecting and exactly that. And I will say on a side, they were looking for, we met with Sil, that they're looking for an evaluator. So I will send too, I'm not sure where she left off on that, but I'm just thinking of students. She was actually looking to have a position to have someone who evaluates their program. They had gotten a recent grant. But that's what, so I will say too, so it's been awesome to kind of connect and meet with everyone. And it's challenging though, because everyone's time's limited, right? Like, so how do you meet with all these community partners and make a difference and get their buy-in? Because, right, how many times do researchers go out and ask, and then they never hear from them, or they take their data and then they don't. So that's why, like, even doing the fact sheets, it's like, we want to contribute. And if honestly, we have these amazing, Ryan Kilmer and Ariana Shahufar, who was on there, they've been in the community for 25 years. So they know they have the reputation that we could never have done this work if it wasn't for them introducing us to exactly who you're saying, because I'd have no clue who that was. But thank you. And that's great to hear that you're actually working with them and volunteering.
Thank you for doing very valuable research. I am a meteorologist, so I just like out of my personal interest.
That's awesome. That's one of the reasons the geography department is so awesome. We've got all these overlapping interests and skill sets. Stephanie, I ended up focusing a bit on the maps, and I was noticing the sort of spatial mismatch between where children of immigrants are and where these services are. And it would be interesting to sort of put a number on that to see, what the mismatch is. But I was wondering if now I know that the city's becoming more and more gentrified, and the kind of story that we're getting behind the scenes that's not been especially researched right now is how a lot of groups are getting forced to the edge of the county and to the edge of the city because of real estate values and lack of affordable housing, which would seem to dramatically exacerbate this spatial mismatch problem. Anything there? That sounds like it could be a nice little piece of research.
So also actually that's coming up in the focus groups a lot. And so this is one where a lot of parents are talking about feeling pushed out. So one of the big concerns was housing costs, right? So we're trying to talk about, and that's where it's getting to this needing to recognize the cross policy domains or sectors where, so early childhood education, if you're wanting to invest in there, you can't neglect housing costs because that's impacting where parents are having to move. And then they talked quite a bit about they'd have to go a long ways to drive to go get access to a park, things, because these are people with young children. And many had talked as well about this feeling that the community has changed, similar to what you're talking about, where when they grew up in this context, there were community centers and places to go. But now, and those used to be free, but now, and one of them was talking about, it was just always white 30-year-olds who are now going there, right? Like, and that's this gentrification. Her quote was really telling. So this is where I think those nice synergies. So I'm not the GIS expert, but I think what Eric and them can do, like now we're wanting to try to see and show that story, kind of maybe looking more historical data. And really, so this was, we had maybe, I guess maybe it was 6 months we started this project, but not that much time. But just even creating the index of services took a long time. right? So even the mapping, I don't think and that's where we're wanting to go now, is we want to be more thoughtful about the mapping, similar to what you're doing. We just did some very basic ones because they were needing us to report out right away. But that takes time. And creating a service inventory is not interesting, even though it takes a ton of time. We couldn't just say we did this. They wanted some maps. And
well, that's why I'm really glad to see that you're building a database. So it's one of those things where you do it once, hopefully, and then you just update a little bit. So that also lets me, my own personal interest involves equity and access to green space. And my instinct is a lot of these families with young children use green space because it's affordable. Maybe it has some cultural significance. And Mecklenburg County in the city of Charlotte is famous for having less accessible green space and parks than almost any major city. So I was wondering if that's come up in your conversations, because I also think that there's this mismatch between where people are and their access to parks.
And so this is one where new collaborations and trying to share, right? Like, so this is where too, when I was talking about like wanting to share data, like not only, I mean, academics are often, I would say in the immigration world, hesitant to share because you also want to publish first, right? Like, so even that RAIDS data, we didn't share until later, but then that stops research from advancing, right? So I just think that we saw that with our community partners too, hesitant to share data. But I'm saying that, and that did come up amongst parents. They talked about lack of safe spaces of where they could have their kids play, because this is exactly what they're needing. And I mean, Charlotte has a lot of HOAs, private neighborhoods who have, right? And that was a shock to me when I came to Charlotte. I was frustrated, and we live in a well-off neighborhood, but there's a city park's really far. Right. And then, so that's one of my own personal frustrations. But so the parents had talked about that. And that's where we would love to now be able to do what you're saying and make those connections where, as like, policymakers want the story, they want to hear it, right? Like, that's important to hear that story, but they want what you're just talking about now is showing the data, like the numbers. So that would be in the future. We've talked about that. We just don't have data on parks.
Well, we have some great relationships with the Park and Rec department, which is at the county level, so that if you want to do some research that way, we have access to those places. And so, final question is for the areas of research excellence effort that we just went through. Our own group is working with the Institute for Social Capital around their massive data set that's hard. It's hard to get around, but we're thinking of some clever ways and able to make it easier for us researchers to get and use that information. Does your work, do you guys cross-pollinate at all? Because it seems like there's a lot of overlap.
So this one, so this is me being new to Charlotte, and I've heard of these different institutes and have connected. So part of our grant funding is from the Gambrell Fellowship, which is ran by Urban Institute and by, now I'm blanking on her name, but I know she's
Lori
involved.
Thomas?
Yes, from Lori Thomas. And so that would be where we would look, because I know that they have lots of data. We've used the Urban Institute's interactive
live viewer and Well,
yeah.
We'll talk to her, because there's behind the scenes right now, she's working with Doug Haig from the School of Data Science in order to make that sort of create a secure interface for their tetrabytes of information. And so and she's back after being off for a while. So if you reach out to her, it could be an interesting conversation that would benefit us all, because that would give us a way to get at your data in ways that we could use and make maps and do these sorts of analysis and collaborate essentially.
No, I think that would be great, because that's one where we spend so much time just collecting policies. And if we figure out a way to share it, because it's just so much wasted time trying to get these data, when if we could figure out a way to share it, would save time and we could get lots more faster and more meaningful results and change.
Yeah, so don't be afraid to reach back. And if you're interested in sort of a tickler or invite, just email me and I'll get that done. Well, we've come sort of toward the end of our session. Are there any more questions out there? Well, let me say thank you so much for that conversation. Really brought it home for what it means to live in this community and all these people. And we greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's been great to be here.
Take care, all.
Good luck
Thanks,
with your
Stephanie.
research.